My sister abandoned her 1-month-old baby on my freezing porch at 2 in the morning with a note telling me he was my burden now. My parents told me to raise him myself to repay my debt to the family. They thought I was just a lonely, powerless assistant who would quietly clean up their golden child's mess like I always did. So I smiled, took the baby in, and prepared to show them exactly who they were messing with. What I did next left them homeless, bankrupt, and begging for my forgiveness. My name is Cassidy, and at 35 years old, I knew the exact cost of being the family disappointment. The price was usually paid in forced smiles at Thanksgiving and ignored phone calls on my birthday. But on a freezing Tuesday in February, the price was dropped right on my front porch. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to clean up the toxic messes your family left behind. It was exactly 2:14 in the morning. The Boston sleet was coming down in sideways sheets, turning my driveway into a treacherous sheet of black ice. I was awake reviewing a crisis management strategy for a client when the doorbell rang. It was not a polite chime. It was 3 frantic, piercing rings that echoed through my quiet house. I did not expect a visitor. I expected a disaster. In my family, those two things were always synonymous. I pulled my fleece robe tight against the chill, unlocked the heavy deadbolt, and swung the oak door open. The porch was completely empty. There were no headlights illuminating the street, and no car idling in the driveway. Just the biting winter wind howling through the bare maple trees in my front yard. I stepped out shivering and was about to shut the door when a faint, muffled sound stopped me dead in my tracks. A tiny whimper. I looked down. Sitting on the freezing concrete partially shielded by one of my large ceramic planters was a premium leather car seat. Inside, swaddled in a thin fleece blanket that was quickly absorbing the freezing rain, was a baby. My nephew Leo. He was exactly 1 month old. Tucked under the plastic handle of the carrier was a piece of personalized stationery. It was the expensive kind, thick and textured with the monogram BH embossed in gold foil. I did not need to read the handwriting to know it was from my younger sister Brittany. But I read it anyway under the dim yellow glow of the porch light. The note read, "Cass, I cannot do this anymore. I need to find myself. You do not have a husband or kids, and your little assistant job gives you plenty of free time. He is your burden now. Do not try to find me." Most people would have panicked in that exact moment. Most people would have collapsed onto the freezing concrete crying out for help or dialing 911 in a state of sheer hysteria. I did not. I spent my entire childhood and adult life cleaning up Brittany's messes. When she wrecked our father's luxury car at 17, I was the one who quietly drove her home. When she dropped out of 3 different private colleges, I was the one who packed up her dorm rooms and handled the administration. I reached down, unhooked the carrier, and brought my freezing nephew into the warmth of the foyer. His lips were trembling, and his tiny hands were balled into tight purple fists. "Welcome to the real world, little man," I whispered carefully, lifting him out of the damp blankets. He let out a loud wail that echoed off the high ceilings of my living room. I carried him straight into the kitchen, keeping my breathing slow and measured. I did not panic because my entire career was built on managing disasters. My family thought I was a glorified secretary for a local marketing agency. They had absolutely no idea I was the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Crisis Public Relations. I spent my days managing the public relations nightmares of Fortune 500 companies. I handled corporate espionage, embezzlement scandals, and high-profile executive divorces before my morning coffee. A runaway sister was child's play. As I warmed a bottle of emergency formula I kept in the pantry for when my friends visited with their infants, my phone buzzed heavily on the granite counter. It was an urgent text message from Brittany's husband, Jamal. Jamal is an African-American data analyst, a brilliant and kind man my parents had vehemently opposed simply because his skin color did not match their country club aesthetic and because he only made a standard 6-figure salary. His text read, "Cassidy, is she with you? She cleared out our joint savings accounts. All of it. I cannot find Leo. And I looked at the baby, who was now eagerly drinking from the warm bottle, his small chest rising and falling steadily against my arm. I picked up my phone with my free hand and typed back a single decisive sentence. Come to my house right now, Jamal, and bring a lawyer. The very next morning, the winter sun was blindingly bright, reflecting harshly off the fresh sheet of ice that coated my front lawn. At precisely 9 o'clock, my parents' pristine silver Mercedes sport utility vehicle pulled into my driveway. They did not knock. They never did. They let themselves in with the spare key I had foolishly given them 3 years ago for emergencies. Cassidy, what is this absolute nonsense you texted us? My mother, Patricia, announced before she even took off her fur-lined winter coat. My mother was a woman who valued public appearances above oxygen. She marched straight into my kitchen, her designer heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She was followed closely by my father, Harrison, who was already impatiently checking his gold watch, as if my house was merely an annoying layover on his way to somewhere far more important. They both stopped abruptly when they saw the portable bassinet situated in the center of my living room. Leo was fast asleep inside, wrapped tightly in a fresh, warm blanket. "Where is she?" Harrison demanded, his face flushing red. His tone held no concern for his tiny, vulnerable grandson. It only held sheer annoyance at the massive inconvenience this situation posed to his perfectly structured Sunday schedule. I did not raise my voice. I simply walked over and handed them the gold-embossed note Brittany had left tucked into the car seat. She left him on the concrete porch at 2 a.m. in the middle of a freezing rainstorm, I stated flatly. She is gone. Patricia snatched the note from my hand. I watched her eyes scan the elegant handwriting, her perfectly manicured fingernails tapping an anxious rhythm against the paper. I stood there and waited for the outrage. I waited for her to condemn the daughter she had coddled and spoiled for 30 years. I waited for her to rush to the bassinet and check on the infant who had nearly frozen to death. Instead, Patricia let out a dramatic sigh, folded the heavy paper, and casually slipped it into her expensive leather handbag. "Well," Patricia said smoothly, walking right past the baby and heading straight toward my espresso machine. "She is clearly suffering from a severe case of postpartum depression. The poor girl is completely exhausted. Jamal has been absolutely useless to her. He is constantly working and neglecting her emotional needs. She just needs a little break at a wellness retreat to clear her head." I stared at her back as she began frothing milk for her coffee. The sheer audacity of her delusions sucked the oxygen right out of the room. She abandoned an infant in a snowstorm. "Mother," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low. "That is a felony child endangerment charge. That is not an excuse for a spa day." Harrison stepped forward, his jaw set in that familiar, intimidating line he used to bully his employees. "Watch your tone, Cassidy," he snapped. "Your sister is going through an incredibly fragile time right now. You are her older sister. You have always been solitary. You work that little assistant job from home anyway, so you have plenty of free time. You can watch the boy for a few months until she gets her spark back." I looked at him, genuinely marveling at the sheer audacity. "You want me to raise her child?" I asked. "Oh, do not be so dramatic," Patricia scoffed, turning around to take a delicate sip of the espresso she had just made herself. "It is the very least you can do for this family. We spent thousands of dollars on your braces and your useless liberal arts degree. We always knew you would never give us grandchildren of your own because you refused to settle down. You should consider this a blessing. Besides, you owe us. You owe us for not turning out perfectly like Brittany." There it was, the ultimate truth of my existence spoken aloud in my own kitchen. In their eyes, I was nothing more than the family mule. I was expected to carry the heavy, crushing weight of the golden child's failures, while remaining entirely invisible and grateful for the scraps of their attention. 5 years ago, those cruel words would have made me cry. 10 years ago, they would have made me yell and scream about the blatant injustice of it all. Today I felt nothing but a profound, icy clarity. I did not feel the urge to argue or defend my life choices. I just smiled. It was a cold, detached smile that made Harrison suddenly shift uncomfortably on his expensive Italian loafers. "Fine," I said softly, holding his gaze until he looked away. I turned my back on them and walked toward my home office. I stepped into my home office, closing the heavy French doors quietly behind me. To my family, this room was just a pathetic little corner where I allegedly answered emails and scheduled mundane meetings for a mid-level manager. In reality, it was the absolute command center of Vanguard Crisis Public Relations. My polished mahogany desk held 3 sleek high-resolution monitors, and my heavy steel filing cabinets were secured with state-of-the-art biometric locks. I bypassed my usual workstation entirely and walked straight over to the high-capacity laser printer sitting in the corner of the room. Waiting on the output tray was a freshly printed stack of dense legal documents. At exactly 4 o'clock this morning, while the baby was finally sleeping, I had woken up my firm's lead family law attorney. I paid him an emergency retainer that rivaled my father's yearly country club membership fee to draft these exact papers immediately. They were completely ironclad. I picked up the top document and quickly scanned the text. It was a formal waiver of guardianship and a complete transfer of temporary medical and legal authority. In the state of Massachusetts, if an infant is abandoned, the immediate next of kin usually steps in. My parents, as the maternal grandparents, had unquestionable priority. This document legally stripped them of that priority, explicitly citing their refusal to assume care and transferring all temporary decision-making power directly to me. I grabbed a heavy silver fountain pen from my desk organizer and walked back out to the kitchen. Patricia was currently inspecting her reflection in the dark glass of my modern oven door, carefully adjusting her pearl earrings. Harrison was typing furiously on his smartphone, already mentally checked out of the situation and focused on his golf schedule. Neither of them had even bothered to walk the 10 feet over to the bassinet to look at their tiny sleeping grandson. I set the thick stack of papers down on the granite kitchen island with a soft thud. I placed the silver pen right on top of it. "What is this?" Harrison asked, eyeing the paperwork with immediate suspicion. "Is it a hospital bill?" "Because I am absolutely not paying for diapers and expensive formula. That is your responsibility now." I kept my expression perfectly neutral. "No, Dad," I said smoothly. "It is just a medical authorization and temporary guardianship waiver. Since you both agreed that I should be the one to watch Leo while Brittany is away at her wellness retreat, I need your signatures." Patricia scoffed, turning away from her reflection. "Why on earth would we need to sign anything? Just watch the boy Cassidy." "It is really not that complicated. It is actually very complicated, Mother," I replied, mimicking her condescending tone just enough to sound compliant. "If Leo gets a severe ear infection, or if he needs emergency medical care, the hospital will not let me authorize treatment. I am just the aunt. Since Brittany is completely unreachable and you two are the legal next of kin, the state requires your written consent. Unless, of course, you want the hospital calling you at 3 in the morning every time he runs a high fever. Or better yet, I can just have Child Protective Services drop him off at your front door if a legal medical emergency arises. The mere mention of being woken up in the middle of the night or having government vehicles parked in their pristine driveway worked exactly like a charm. Harrison's suspicion vanished instantly, replaced by a deep selfish panic. He hated being inconvenienced, and he despised anything that threatened his manicured public image. "Give me the pen," Harrison demanded. He grabbed the silver pen and flipped straight to the last page. He did not read a single paragraph. He did not ask what the fine print meant. He just aggressively scrawled his signature on the dotted line, desperate to wash his hands of the boy sleeping in my living room. He slid the paperwork over to my mother. "Sign it, Patricia," he ordered abruptly. "We have a brunch reservation at the club in 45 minutes with the Henderson family, and I am not letting Brittany's little meltdown ruin my Sunday networking." Patricia took the pen gracefully. She did not even bother looking at the page as she signed her loopy, elegant name right next to my father's. "There," she said, tossing the pen back onto the counter. "All done. You have full permission to take him to the doctor. Do not call us unless it is absolutely life or death, Cassidy. And even then, send a text first. I picked up the document. Their signatures stared back at me in bold black ink. They had just legally surrendered their grandson. They had no idea they had just willingly signed away their only leverage over me and this child. "We are leaving now," Harrison announced, buttoning his expensive wool coat. "Keep the boy quiet. And if anyone asks you, tell them Brittany is out of town on a luxury retreat. We do not need the neighborhood gossips spreading vicious rumors about our family." I watched them walk out my front door without a single glance back at the bassinet. The heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving the house in total silence. I looked down at the legally binding waiver in my hand, a genuine smile finally reaching my eyes. The trap had just snapped shut, and they had locked themselves inside. The moment the taillights of their Mercedes disappeared down the icy street, I went straight to work. I carefully folded the signed guardianship waiver and locked it inside the fireproof safe hidden beneath my desk. I checked on Leo one more time. He was still sleeping soundly, completely oblivious to the fact that his biological grandparents had just discarded him like a piece of junk mail. I gently tucked the fleece blanket around his small shoulders, feeling a fierce, unfamiliar protective instinct flare up in my chest. I was not going to let my family destroy this boy the way they had tried to destroy me. I sat down at my mahogany desk, woke up my 3 monitors, and initiated a secure encrypted conference call. It was time to deploy the full force of Vanguard Crisis Public Relations. Within 30 seconds, 3 of my top executives joined the line. There was Jonathan, my ruthless lead legal counsel. There was David, my senior financial forensic investigator who could track a single missing dollar through a maze of offshore shell companies. And there was Rachel, my media containment specialist. They thought they were logging in on a Sunday morning to handle a corporate meltdown for a Fortune 500 client. They had no idea the target was my own sister. "Good morning, team," I said, keeping my voice crisp and professional. "We have a domestic code red. The subject is Brittany Harrison. I need a full digital and financial sweep starting from the last 48 hours. Pull her phone records, track her credit card pings, and pull the local traffic camera footage around my neighborhood from 2 o'clock this morning. I want to know exactly where she went, who she is with, and what she is driving." Jonathan spoke up first, the rapid clacking of his mechanical keyboard echoing through the headset. "Consider it done, Cassidy. We are running the plates on her leased SUV right now. Do we need to contact the authorities regarding a missing person?" "Absolutely not," I replied instantly. "She is not missing. She is running. Just find out what she is running from." The line went quiet for about 10 minutes as my team worked their magic. This was what I paid them exorbitant salaries to do. They were the best fixers on the East Coast. While they dug through the digital dirt, I started drafting a timeline of events, preparing the necessary documentation to formalize my temporary custody of Leo through the state courts first thing Monday morning. Suddenly, David cleared his throat over the speaker. "Cassidy," he said, his usually calm voice laced with genuine shock. "I just bypassed the security firewalls on her primary banking applications. You need to see this immediately. I am pushing the screen share to your main monitor now." A spreadsheet materialized on my center screen. It was a live feed of Brittany's joint bank accounts with Jamal. My eyes scanned the glaring red numbers, my blood running cold. I expected to see a few maxed-out credit cards from her usual luxury shopping sprees. I did not expect to see absolute financial devastation. Over the past 72 hours, Brittany had systematically drained every single joint savings account, investment portfolio, and emergency fund she shared with Jamal. The money had not been slowly withdrawn. It was aggressively transferred out in massive wire transactions to an untraceable offshore account in the Cayman Islands. "How much?" I asked, leaning closer to the monitor. $250,000, David answered grimly. She completely liquidated his assets. And that is not all. She also took out a massive personal loan against his primary vehicle and maxed out 3 separate credit cards under his name. She did not just run away because she was stressed or depressed. She committed premeditated grand larceny and federal wire fraud. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the staggering numbers on the screen. My parents' narrative about her fragile mental health and postpartum depression evaporated instantly. Brittany was not a tragic, overwhelmed mother seeking a wellness retreat. She was a calculated thief who had just robbed her husband blind and left her newborn baby to freeze to death so she could make a clean getaway without any extra baggage. Jonathan chimed in, his legal mind already racing. Cassidy, if Jamal reports this to the police, she is looking at serious federal prison time. We need to lock down this evidence before she realizes we are tracking her and tries to wipe the digital trail. Download everything I ordered coldly. Secure the wire transfer confirmations, the IP addresses, and the timestamps. Package it into a hard drive. We are going to hand it over on a silver platter. Just as I gave the command, the heavy chime of my front doorbell rang out twice. I looked at the security camera feed on my third monitor. Standing on my icy porch, looking utterly defeated and terrified, was Jamal. He had a thick manila folder in his hands and a police cruiser idling slowly on the street behind him. The first chess piece was officially in play. I watched Jamal through the high-definition security feed for a few seconds. He was shivering in a thin wool coat, his shoulders hunched against the biting winter wind. Beside him stood a uniformed Boston police officer, looking stern and ready for an immediate altercation. I immediately locked my computer screens, walked out of my home office, and headed for the front door. When I pulled the heavy oak door open, Jamal looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, and the deep dark bags under them told me he had not slept a single minute since yesterday. We had never been close. My parents had made sure of that. They constantly criticized him, undermined his successful career as a data analyst, and made family gatherings so unbearable that he eventually stopped attending altogether. Because I was the outcast of the family, my parents had painted me as an unstable, jealous spinster to everyone they met. That naturally made Jamal keep his distance from me as well. We were two outsiders kept carefully separated by my parents' toxic narrative and relentless manipulation. Cassidy. Jamal said, his voice cracking slightly as he spoke. Where is he? Where is my son? Before I could answer, the police officer stepped forward, resting a heavy hand on his utility belt. Ma'am, we received an urgent report of a missing infant and stolen funds. Mr. Davis believes his wife Brittany Harrison may have brought the child here to your residence. I did not flinch. My professional instincts took over completely. Officer, please come inside out of the cold, I said calmly, stepping back and holding the door wide open. Both of you. My sister is not here, but my nephew is. He is completely safe and sound. The relief that washed over Jamal's face was so profound it almost made his knees buckle. He practically pushed past the officer and stumbled into my bright foyer. I quickly led them into the living room where the portable bassinet still sat in the center of the rug. Jamal dropped to his knees on the hardwood floor the second he saw Leo sleeping peacefully under the warm fleece blanket. He reached out with trembling hands, gently touching the baby's tiny cheek, as if to confirm he was actually real. Thank God, Jamal whispered softly, a single tear escaping and tracking down his frozen cheek. Thank God you are okay. The officer took out a small black notepad. So the child was dropped off here at your home. Did your sister explain where she was going or when she would return? I shook my head and handed the officer the gold-embossed note Brittany had left with the car seat. I found him on my front porch at 2 o'clock this morning in the middle of the sleet storm. My sister left this note and completely vanished. She did not call and she did not ring the doorbell. It was pure luck that I was still awake working and heard him crying outside. The officer read the cruel note, his professional demeanor slipping into visible disgust. She left a 1-month-old baby outside in freezing temperatures. Yes, I confirmed steadily. And earlier this morning my parents came over. They refused to take any responsibility for him, claiming Brittany just needed a wellness retreat. But they did sign this legal document. I walked over to the kitchen island, retrieved a copy of the guardianship waiver from my folder, and handed it to the officer. It legally transfers temporary medical and caretaking authority to me, signed by the maternal grandparents. I was actually preparing to file for emergency temporary custody with the family court tomorrow morning to protect him. Jamal stood up from the bassinet, turning to face me. The tension between us was suddenly palpable. He looked at me with a complex mixture of immense gratitude and deep suspicion. "You were going to file for custody?" he asked, his tone guarded and defensive. "Cassidy, I am his father. He belongs with me, not you or your parents." I looked him directly in the eye, dropping the polite facade entirely. "Jamal, we both know my family has treated you like absolute garbage since the day you met Brittany. And I know they have probably told you horrible things about me over the years. But you need to listen to me very carefully right now. I am not your enemy. I did not ask for custody to keep him from you. I did it to build an unbreakable legal wall so my parents cannot use him as a pawn when they realize the massive mess Brittany just created." Jamal frowned deeply, crossing his arms over his chest. "What do you mean by a massive mess?" "I told the police she cleared out our joint bank accounts. It is incredibly bad, but it is just money." I took a deep breath. "It is much worse than that, Jamal. You need to tell the officer to step outside for a few minutes, and then you need to come look at my computer screen. I have hard evidence of what Brittany actually did, and it is going to change absolutely everything." Jamal turned back to the police officer standing in my foyer. "Officer, would you mind giving us 5 minutes in private?" Jamal asked, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "I need to see whatever evidence she is talking about before we proceed with any official statements." The officer nodded slowly, patting his heavy radio belt. "I will be waiting right outside in my cruiser, Mr. Davis. Take your time, but do not touch or alter any evidence on that computer." The heavy front door clicked shut, leaving Jamal and me alone in the quiet house save for the soft, rhythmic breathing of the baby in the living room. "Follow me," I said, leading him down the short hallway to my home office. I pushed open the French doors and gestured to the leather chair opposite my mahogany desk. Jamal sat down heavily, resting his face in his hands for a long moment. "Before I show you this, you need to understand that my team is currently tracking her digital footprint," I explained, tapping the keyboard to awaken the monitors. "But first, you need to tell me exactly how she managed to liquidate $250,000 without triggering fraud alerts or requiring your dual authorization." Jamal let out a bitter, exhausted laugh. "She did not just take the money, Cassidy. She laid a trap. 2 days ago, while I was at work, she went to the local precinct. She filed a domestic disturbance report and requested an emergency temporary restraining order. She told them I had become violently unstable, that I had physically threatened her and the baby, and that I was planning to drain our accounts and flee the state. It was a complete and utter lie, but she played the terrified victim perfectly. Because of her false report, the bank granted her immediate emergency access to our joint funds under a domestic abuse exemption. She legally locked me out of my own life. The sheer level of manipulation was staggering even to someone in my profession. I stared at him, absorbing the cruel genius of my sister's plan. "She did not just steal your money," I said quietly. "She actively framed you for domestic abuse to justify the theft. She knew my parents would immediately believe that narrative because they have always looked down on you." Jamal nodded, his jaw clenching. "I spent the entire night detained for questioning while she was busy wiring my life savings to an offshore account. By the time my lawyer cleared up the false allegations and proved I was at the office during the supposed incident, she was completely gone. She took the money, the car, and I thought she took my son. I thought I would never see him again." I turned my main monitor toward him. "You need to brace yourself, Jamal. What I am about to show you is going to hurt worse than the stolen money." I clicked on the video file my team had extracted from my porch security camera. The screen flickered to life, showing the black and white infrared footage of my front driveway at 2:14 in the morning. We watched in absolute silence as Brittany's leased luxury sport utility vehicle pulled into the frame. The sleet was visibly coming down in heavy sheets. The driver's side door opened and Brittany stepped out. She was wearing her expensive designer puffer jacket, the hood pulled up against the freezing rain. She walked around to the back seat and casually pulled out the car seat containing her 1-month-old son. She did not cradle him. She carried the heavy seat with one hand, walking briskly up my driveway. Jamal leaned closer to the screen, his breath hitching. She marched straight onto the porch, dropped the car seat carelessly onto the concrete floor, and shoved the envelope under the plastic handle. She did not lean down to check if he was warm. She did not hesitate or cry. She simply turned her back, walked to her warm car, and sped off into the dark night without a single backward glance. The video ended, leaving a frozen frame of her taillights disappearing down the street. Jamal sat perfectly still. The heartbreak in his eyes was rapidly shifting into something entirely different. It was hardening into a cold, unbreakable anger. She threw him away. Jamal whispered, his voice trembling with a terrifying calm. She threw our son away, like absolute garbage, just so she could go spend my money. I reached across the desk and closed the laptop. Yes, she did, I said. My parents are covering for her. They signed away their rights this morning. So the question is, what are we going to do about it? We are going to destroy her, Jamal said. I nodded slowly, letting the heavy gravity of his words settle in the quiet room. Destroying my sister was not just a fleeting emotional reaction. It was now a necessary operational objective. Good, I replied, my voice perfectly steady. If we are going to do this correctly, we cannot afford to be emotional. We have to be entirely surgical. Right now, Brittany thinks she has completely won. She thinks you are permanently trapped by her false police report, and she thinks I am just the compliant, invisible older sister who will quietly raise her child while my parents cover her tracks. We will let them believe that false narrative until the precise moment we spring the trap. Jamal exhaled a long, shaky breath, aggressively rubbing his temples. I cannot go back to my house right now, Cassidy. The police temporarily seized it as a potential crime scene because of her fabricated domestic violence claim. Even if they had not locked it down, I refused to be in the place where she planned this massive betrayal. I had already anticipated this exact problem. You are not going anywhere, I told him firmly. You are staying right here. The guest bedroom is yours for as long as you need it. Leo desperately needs his father, and I need a capable partner in this fight. We are going to lock this house down, pool our resources, and build a legal case so airtight that neither Brittany nor my parents will ever recover from the impact. Jamal looked at me, the years of awkward family dinners and manufactured distance melting away in an instant. Thank you, Cassidy. I truly mean it. That same afternoon, Jamal officially moved into my guest room with nothing but a small duffel bag of clothes his lawyer had managed to retrieve. The transition was remarkably seamless. For the first time in my entire life, I was not alone in dealing with the radioactive fallout of my family's toxic behavior. We quickly fell into a silent, highly efficient routine. We became an unexpected co-parenting unit, operating like a trained military squad. When Leo woke up crying at 3 a.m, Jamal was already warming the milk bottle while I changed his diaper. When Jamal had to spend hours on the phone with his legal team, meticulously untangling the financial mess Brittany had left behind, I took Leo into my home office, gently rocking him in my lap while I directed my public relations firm. We rarely spoke about how physically exhausted we were. We simply did not need to. The shared betrayal bonded us significantly tighter than any blood relation ever could have. During the day, my house transformed into a fortified war room. I brought in Vanguard Crisis Public Relations top security contractors to immediately upgrade the perimeter. We installed state-of-the-art hidden cameras, reinforced the exterior doors, and set up a secure encrypted server in the basement to safely store the growing mountain of digital evidence. My financial forensic investigator worked directly alongside Jamal's defense lawyers. Together, they meticulously tracked every single stolen dollar, mapping out a blatant, undeniable trail of federal wire fraud and international money laundering. Meanwhile, I focused my professional expertise heavily on my parents. I knew Patricia and Harrison better than anyone else, which meant I knew exactly how they would try to spin this catastrophic disaster to protect their pristine social standing. I tasked my media containment specialist with continuously monitoring my parents' digital footprints. We permanently archived every text message, every social media post, and every email they sent regarding the situation. As the days quietly turned into weeks, Jamal and I watched Leo begin to genuinely thrive. The fragile, freezing infant we had rescued from the porch was rapidly transforming into a smiling, healthy baby boy who recognized his father's voice and grasped my finger with surprising strength. Every time Leo smiled, the protective fire in Jamal's eyes burned a little brighter. He was an incredible patient father, entirely contradicting the vicious lies my family had always told. One evening after putting Leo to sleep, Jamal walked into my office. I was reviewing the finalized temporary custody orders the family court judge had quietly granted us, thanks to the waiver my parents foolishly signed. Jamal sat down and placed a thick stack of printed bank statements on my desk. "My lawyers just confirmed it," Jamal said smoothly. "The offshore accounts are frozen. The feds flagged her passport. And I received a notification that she tried to use a canceled credit card at a luxury resort in Cabo. She is running out of money." I smiled. "Perfect," I replied. "She will come crawling back very soon and we will be completely ready." But while we waited for my sister to hit absolute rock bottom, my parents decided to launch an offensive of their own. They realized very quickly that they could not produce Brittany or the baby to keep up appearances at their elite social gatherings. The Belmont Country Club was a breeding ground for vicious rumors, and my mother refused to let anyone else dictate the narrative of her perfect family. If she could not hide the truth, she was going to completely rewrite it. It started on a quiet Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen feeding Leo his first spoonful of mashed peas when Rachel, my media containment specialist, called me on the secure line. "Cassidy," Rachel said, her tone completely deadpan. "You need to log into your alternate social media account right now. Your mother just posted a manifesto and it is gaining an alarming amount of traction among the local country club elite." I handed the feeding spoon to Jamal, grabbed my tablet, and pulled up Patricia's public profile. There it was. A long, melodramatic status update, complete with a strategically chosen, tearful selfie of my mother clutching a baby blanket. The post was a masterclass in psychological projection and blatant defamation. According to my mother's fabricated public statement, Brittany was currently residing at an exclusive, undisclosed holistic healing center, bravely battling severe postpartum depression. That was the setup. Then came the vicious attack. Patricia wrote that I, her deeply troubled and chronically single older daughter, had exploited Brittany's fragile mental state. She claimed I had hired predatory lawyers to manipulate the legal system and forcefully rip baby Leo from his loving mother's arms. She actually used the phrase barren, jealous spinster to describe me. She told her hundreds of wealthy followers that I was desperately trying to fill the void of my empty, loveless life by stealing my sister's child. The comments section was an absolute nightmare. Aunts, uncles, and my parents' wealthy friends were flooding the post with prayers for Brittany and absolute disgust for me. They called me a monster. They called me a bitter, lonely woman who could not get a man, so I decided to kidnap a baby instead. They completely erased Jamal from the narrative, making absolutely no mention of the fact that the child's biological father was living with me and actively caring for his son. Jamal read the post over my shoulder. I felt his entire body tense with pure rage. His hands balled into fists and his jaw locked tightly. "I am driving over there right now," Jamal said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I am going to stand in the middle of their stupid country club dining room and tell everyone exactly what their precious daughter did to me and my son." I reached out and grabbed his arm firmly. "No, you are not," I commanded softly. "You are going to sit right here and feed your son his breakfast." Jamal looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Cassidy, they are publicly destroying your reputation. They are calling you a kidnapper and a jealous spinster. How can you just sit there and let them lie to the entire world about you? I took a slow, calming breath and looked back at the tablet screen. Because, Jamal, I am a crisis public relations expert, I explained patiently. The first rule of a smear campaign is that you never interrupt your enemy when they are making a massive, legally actionable mistake. What my mother is doing right now is not just rude. It is textbook defamation. She is publishing malicious false statements to a broad audience that directly damage my personal and professional character. I tapped the screen, taking a high-resolution screenshot of the post and the ensuing comments. I immediately sent it to my legal team. By putting this in writing, she is handing me the exact weapon I need to destroy her financially. Every single like, every single comment, and every single share increases the monetary damages she will owe me when I file the defamation lawsuit. For the next 2 weeks, my parents escalated their vicious campaign. Harrison joined in posting cryptic messages on his business networking pages about the heartbreak of family betrayal and the cruelty of jealous siblings. Patricia started a private group chat with our extended relatives, spinning wild tales about how I was refusing to let them see their beloved grandson. Every time they posted, Rachel archived the digital footprint. We saved the timestamps, the engagement metrics, and the exact wording. We built a digital fortress of undeniable evidence. They thought they were isolating me. They thought they were turning the entire world against the family outcast, just like they had done when I was a teenager. But they did not realize they were dealing with a woman who controlled public narratives for a living. They were blindly walking deeper into a trap of their own making, stringing up the very rope I would soon use to hang them. The tension in my house had settled into a quiet, focused hum. It had been exactly 3 weeks since Brittany vanished into the freezing rain. The frantic social media posts from my parents had gradually slowed down, replaced by a sudden, deafening silence. I knew exactly what that silence meant. My financial investigation team had informed me early that morning that Brittany's offshore accounts were officially frozen by federal authorities. Her passport was flagged. She was completely out of cash, which meant she would inevitably reach out to her primary enablers for a bailout. My cell phone rang at exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The caller identification flashed my father's name. I answered on the second ring immediately, putting the call on speakerphone so Jamal, who was feeding Leo a bottle on the sofa nearby, could hear every word. "Hello, Dad," I said, my voice dripping with forced, neutral politeness. Cassidy Harrison barked, skipping any form of standard greeting. "I need you to wire $50,000 to my checking account immediately. I am text messaging you the routing number right now. Make sure it clears by the end of the business day." His voice was incredibly tight, entirely lacking its usual polished country club drawl. He sounded genuinely panicked, though he was trying very hard to mask it with his typical demanding authority. I leaned back in my leather chair, exchanging a knowing glance with Jamal. Jamal raised his eyebrows, pausing the bottle. $50,000, I repeated slowly, letting the massive number hang heavy in the air. That is a very substantial amount of money, Dad. What exactly is the emergency? Did Mother max out her platinum credit card at the spring charity gala again? Do not get smart with me. Harrison snapped, his temper flaring instantly. This is about your sister. We have reason to believe her wellness retreat was a massive scam, and she might be in some kind of serious trouble out of the country. I am hiring a top-tier private investigator to track her down and bring her safely home. The retainer fee is steep, and all of my liquid assets are currently tied up in long-term corporate investments. You have a decent savings account from your little assistant job. Send the money right now. It was almost laughable. He was lying through his teeth. My team knew exactly where Brittany was. She was currently stranded at a luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas, her stolen credit cards declining at the poolside bar. She had clearly called him crying, begging for an immediate cash infusion to pay her massive hotel bill and secure a quiet flight home. And since my father was secretly drowning in debt just to maintain his wealthy public facade, He was trying to extort the cash from the daughter he actively despised in order to save the daughter he adored. "I am not giving you a single dime to fund Brittany's mistakes," I said, dropping the polite tone entirely. "She made her choices. She can deal with the federal consequences." The line went dead silent for 3 heavy seconds. Then Harrison unleashed his ultimate weapon. It was the exact same threat he had used to control my behavior for my entire life. "Listen to me, you ungrateful brat," he hissed venomously. "If you do not transfer those funds by 5 o'clock today, I am calling my estate lawyer. I will write you completely out of the family will. Furthermore, I will immediately sign the deed to the Belmont estate directly over to Brittany. You will not get a single cent of this family wealth, and you will never step foot in my house ever again. Do you understand me?" Jamal looked at me, his eyes wide with absolute disbelief at my father's sheer cruelty. But I did not feel hurt. I did not feel rejected. I felt a massive surge of pure, unadulterated triumph. A genuine laugh bubbled up in my chest, and before I could stop myself, I laughed out loud directly into the phone receiver. "Are you laughing at me?" Harrison roared, the sound echoing through my quiet office. "I am Dad," I replied, my voice as cold as ice. "Go ahead and call your lawyer. Sign the entire estate over to Brittany. Cut me completely out of the will. In fact, I highly encourage you to read the deed to your house very carefully before you try to transfer it to a convicted felon. Have a wonderful afternoon." I pressed the end call button before he could utter another word. The room fell silent again. Jamal stared at me, completely baffled by my reaction. "Cassidy, why did you just tell him to sign his house over to her?" he asked. "They live in a $3 million mansion. That is a massive asset to just throw away out of spite." I smiled, unlocking my bottom desk drawer and pulling out a thick sealed manila envelope. "They live in a $3 million mansion that they lost to bank foreclosure 3 years ago when they secretly paid off Brittany's previous legal debts," I explained smoothly. "They think a private investment firm restructured their mortgage to save them from public bankruptcy. But Vanguard Crisis Public Relations uses a variety of anonymous shell companies for real estate acquisitions. I bought their foreclosed debt, Jamal. They are not paying a mortgage to the bank. They are paying me rent." 4 months drifted by in a peaceful blur. Spring arrived in Boston, melting away the bitter ice and replacing dreary skies with vibrant sunlight. Inside my fortified home, our unconventional family dynamic blossomed into something genuinely beautiful. Leo was now a healthy, laughing 5-month-old boy who had stolen both of our hearts. Jamal had transformed from a devastated husband into a fiercely devoted father. We co-parented, seamlessly functioning as an airtight team, while my legal and investigative units quietly finalized the destruction of my sister and parents. We were waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The universe handed us the ultimate catalyst. It happened on a crisp Tuesday morning. Jamal was sitting at my kitchen island feeding Leo when his cell phone began vibrating endlessly. He answered the call from his lead corporate attorney, listened for exactly 2 minutes, and slowly lowered the phone to the granite counter. His eyes were wide with a mixture of shock and profound validation. "Cassidy," Jamal said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The intellectual property lawsuit against my former tech employer just settled out of court. The judge ruled entirely in my favor. They are paying out the massive settlement by the end of the week." I smiled, pouring myself a fresh cup of coffee. "That is incredible news, Jamal. I know you have been fighting that legal battle for over 3 years. How much is the final financial settlement?" Jamal swallowed hard, looking down affectionately at his tiny son. "After all the legal fees and federal taxes, it is just over $4 million. My coffee cup froze halfway to my mouth. That was not just a comfortable settlement. That was generational wealth. It was the kind of money that made immediate headlines. And sure enough, within 48 hours, a prominent financial news outlet published a detailed article about the massive tech settlement, prominently featuring Jamal's name. I read the article on my tablet and immediately knew our quiet period of peace was officially over. Blood in the water always attracts desperate sharks, and my sister had the absolute best sense of smell in the ocean. Exactly 3 days after the article went live, the peace of my quiet suburban neighborhood was violently shattered. I was in my home office, reviewing a quarterly public relations report, when the heavy brass knocker on my front door began pounding frantically. It was the desperate, aggressive hammering of someone who felt entirely entitled to enter my private space. I pulled up the exterior security camera feed on my monitor. Standing on my front porch, glaring furiously at the solid oak door, was Brittany. She looked absolutely nothing like the polished, arrogant, golden child who had abandoned her baby in the sleet 4 months ago. Her expensive blonde hair was brassy and unkempt, tied back in a messy knot. She was wearing expensive designer clothes, but they looked very wrinkled and slightly oversized. The Cabo sun had given her a fading tan, but the deep dark bags under her eyes betrayed a woman who had completely run out of stolen money, maxed out her credit cards, and burned every bridge. I walked out of my office and signaled for Jamal, who was playing quietly with Leo, to stay completely out of sight. I unlocked the heavy deadbolt and pulled the door wide open, instantly blocking the threshold with my body. "Well," I said coldly, looking her up and down, "if it is not the glorious Mother of the Year returning from her wellness retreat." "Cassidy, move out of my way right now," Brittany snapped aggressively, trying to push past me. I firmly stood my ground, my posture completely rigid and entirely unyielding. "You are not coming inside my house," I told her flatly. "What exactly do you want?" Brittany let out a dramatic sigh, attempting to summon a few fake tears. "I want my precious baby back, Cassidy. I am completely healed now. The luxury retreat gave me the mental clarity I desperately needed to be a deeply loving mother. I came to take Leo back home." I stared at her, disgusted by her sickening greed. "You do not want your son, Brittany. You saw the financial news report about Jamal's settlement, and you realized your abandoned baby is suddenly a massive payday. You want custody so you can drag Jamal into family court and demand $20,000 a month in child support to fund your pathetic lifestyle once again." Brittany dropped the weeping mother act instantly, her eyes flashing with pure malice. "He is my biological son," she hissed. "I am taking him, and I am taking Jamal for every single penny he just made. Get my baby right now, or I will call the local police on you." "Call the police?" I dared her, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Please, Brittany, take out your phone right now and dial 911. Tell the dispatcher you want to reclaim the infant you abandoned in a sleet storm 4 months ago, right after you committed federal wire fraud and fled the country. I am sure the local authorities would be absolutely thrilled to speak with you." Brittany faltered, her hand hovering over her designer purse. She knew she was bluffing, but she was not alone. The sound of heavy footsteps crunching on my gravel walkway caught my attention. I looked past Brittany's shoulder and saw my parents, Harrison and Patricia, marching aggressively up the path. They had parked their Mercedes down the street to stage a coordinated ambush. Patricia was practically vibrating with nervous anger, her jaw set tightly. Harrison looked ready to break down my door. They marched up the porch steps, flanking Brittany like 2 heavily armed guards protecting their sovereign queen. "That is quite enough from you, Cassidy," Harrison barked, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. "You have played your little power games long enough. Your sister is home now. She is fully recovered from her traumatic postpartum episode, and she is ready to take her child back to her house where he belongs. Step aside immediately." I did not move a single inch. "She does not have a house, Dad. She abandoned it, along with her husband and her son, to run off to a Mexican resort with stolen money." Patricia stepped forward, getting aggressively close to my face. "Do not you dare speak to us about stolen money after what you just tried to pull," she hissed venomously. "Harrison told me about your psychotic little delusion on the phone last week, claiming you own our house. You are deeply unwell, Cassidy. You are a sick, jealous woman who is trying to steal a baby because no man will ever want you. Now hand over our grandson before your father physically moves you out of the way." Harrison took a heavy step forward, puffing out his chest to use his physical size to intimidate me. This was his classic move. Whenever his money or his words failed to control a situation, he resorted to physical dominance. He reached out his large hand, gripping my shoulder tightly, attempting to shove me backward into the foyer so they could storm my home. "Do not touch her." The voice was low booming and completely laced with raw fury. It did not come from me. It echoed from the dark hallway behind me. Harrison froze his hand, dropping from my shoulder as if he had been burned. Patricia gasped, taking a sudden step back. Brittany went completely pale, her eyes widening in absolute terror. I stepped aside, allowing Jamal to walk out of the shadows and directly into the afternoon sunlight pouring through the open doorway. He looked entirely different from the broken, desperate man who had shown up on my porch 4 months ago. He was wearing a sharply tailored suit, standing tall, his posture radiating absolute authority and unyielding power. "Jamal?" Patricia stammered, entirely caught off guard. "What on earth are you doing here?" "I live here," Jamal answered coldly, his gaze fixed dead on Brittany. "I have lived here for 4 months, raising the son you threw away like yesterday's garbage." Brittany recovered her composure, her greed quickly overriding her fear. "Perfect," she sneered, crossing her arms. "You are both here. That makes this much easier. Jamal, I am the mother of that child. I am taking him with me right now, and my lawyer will be contacting you tomorrow morning to discuss my monthly child support payments. You owe me half of that tech settlement, and you know it." Jamal did not yell. He did not lose his temper. He simply raised his right hand, revealing 2 crisp, legally stamped documents he had been holding at his side. He held them up so the afternoon sun illuminated the bold black text and the official court seals. "Actually, Brittany, I do not owe you a single dime," Jamal said, his voice deadly calm. "And you are not taking anyone anywhere." He stepped forward and shoved the first document directly against Brittany's chest, forcing her to grab it. "This is a court-ordered, state-certified DNA test," he stated firmly. "It proves my absolute biological paternity of Leo, and this second document is a permanent active restraining order signed by a family court judge just 3 days ago. It explicitly forbids you from coming within 500 feet of me, my son, or this residence. If you do not step off this property immediately, I will have you arrested for violating a direct court order." The silence that followed Jamal's powerful declaration was absolute and incredibly heavy, pressing down on all of us. The crisp spring breeze seemed to vanish completely from the porch, leaving only the uncomfortable sound of Harrison's ragged, angry breathing filling the quiet void. Brittany stared in utter disbelief at the legally binding documents in Jamal's outstretched hand, as if they were venomous snakes ready to strike. The brutal reality of the restraining order was a direct, fatal blow that shattered her lifelong narcissistic delusion. She had fully expected to waltz right into my house, grab the infant she had carelessly discarded, and march straight into family court to secure a massive slice of Jamal's $4 million settlement. Instead, she was standing on my front porch, legally barred from even breathing the same air as her own biological son. But before Brittany could fully process the sheer magnitude of her defeat, my mother completely snapped. Patricia, a woman who had spent her entire adult life meticulously cultivating an image of elegant, restrained perfection at the Belmont Country Club, lost her mind entirely. Her carefully maintained facade shattered into a million jagged pieces, her face contorted into an ugly, vicious mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. With a sudden guttural scream, she lunged directly at me. Her manicured hands curled into tight claws, aiming right for my face. "You malicious witch!" she shrieked, her voice echoing loudly down the quiet suburban street and bouncing off the neighboring houses. "You planned this from the very beginning. You are actively colluding with this broke outsider to completely destroy your own flesh and blood. You could not get a wealthy, respectable man of your own, so you conspired with this pathetic, penniless loser to steal your younger sister's baby." I did not flinch, and I certainly did not retreat. Years of quietly anticipating my family's explosive emotional outbursts had given me incredibly sharp reflexes. I simply took a swift, calculated step to the right, letting Patricia's own aggressive momentum carry her awkwardly forward. She stumbled badly in her expensive designer heels, nearly colliding headfirst with the heavy oak doorframe. Before she could recover her balance and attempt to strike me again, Jamal stepped squarely between us. He did not raise his hands defensively, but his physical presence alone was a massive, immovable wall of authority. "Do not ever attempt to lay a hand on her again," Patricia Jamal warned, his voice vibrating with a terrifying deep resonance that commanded instant respect. "If you take one more aggressive step toward Cassidy, I will have my lawyers add your name to this restraining order before the sun goes down today." Harrison, refusing to be publicly intimidated by a man he deemed entirely inferior, puffed out his chest and pointed a thick, trembling finger at Jamal. "You do not give orders to my wife, you arrogant thug," Harrison bellowed, completely ignoring the fact that the so-called broke outsider standing in front of him was now a very successful multimillionaire. "You do not belong here, Jamal. You are a complete nobody. Now step aside and give my daughter her baby before I physically remove you from this property myself. You are trespassing on my daughter's front porch, and I will not hesitate to use absolute physical force to protect my family from a gold-digging criminal like you." Seeing her father blindly defending her with threats of physical violence, Brittany finally found her voice again. She aggressively dug into her oversized designer purse and pulled out her latest smartphone, holding it up high in the air like a loaded weapon. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Brittany yelled, her hands shaking violently with a volatile mixture of pure rage and sudden panic. "Those documents are completely fake. You printed them off the internet just to scare me away. Jamal, you have always been a manipulative, abusive liar, and Cassidy, you are a complete psychopath for helping him orchestrate this sick little game against me. I am calling the police right now." She tapped the brightly lit screen of her phone, her eyes locking onto mine with a venomous, unblinking glare. "I am dialing 911 this exact second," Brittany threatened loudly, making absolutely sure the nosy neighbors across the street could hear her dramatic performance. "I am telling the emergency dispatchers that my deranged sister and my dangerously abusive ex-husband have violently kidnapped my helpless infant son. I will tell them you are holding him hostage inside this cold house against my will. They will send a dozen armed police officers to forcefully arrest both of you for severe felony kidnapping, and I will be proudly walking out of here with Leo safely in my arms in exactly 5 minutes. You are finished. Do you understand now?" "Go ahead and press dial, Brittany," I said, leaning comfortably against the doorframe. "I am begging you to make that call. Tell the police to come to this exact address. But before you do, you should know that the local precinct already has a massive file with your name on it. It includes the security footage of you dumping a newborn baby on freezing concrete, the fraudulent domestic abuse report you filed against Jamal, and the banking records proving you committed federal wire fraud. So please call them right now. It will save the federal authorities the trouble of tracking you down." Brittany stared at her phone screen, her thumb hovering over the keypad. Her bravado was crumbling rapidly. Her hand shook so violently she nearly dropped the device. She looked up at our father, silently begging him to fix the situation like he always did, but Harrison was completely silent. He was staring intensely at Jamal, entirely thrown off balance by the brutal reality of the multi-million-dollar settlement and the binding restraining order. "Put the phone away and step inside," I commanded, my voice slicing clearly through the heavy tension. "All 3 of you, step into the foyer. I have something you desperately need to see before you leave my property." They hesitated, but their desperate curiosity and total lack of leverage forced them to comply. Jamal took a strategic step back, allowing them to enter my home. I led them straight into the kitchen, stopping firmly behind the large granite island. I reached into my leather briefcase resting on the counter and pulled out a crisp white legal folder. Harrison slammed his heavy hand down on the granite surface, trying to regain control of the room. "I do not care what fake legal documents you have printed out, Cassidy," he growled. "We are taking the boy home today. You cannot just legally steal a child from his biological mother." I opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Actually, Dad, you can, I replied smoothly, especially when the biological grandparents legally hand the child over willingly. I placed the paper on the smooth granite and slid it directly across the kitchen island toward him. Harrison looked down, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. Patricia leaned in close beside him, squinting at the page. It was the exact document they had hastily signed in this very kitchen 4 months ago, right before rushing off to their Sunday brunch. What is this? Patricia demanded, her eyes darting across the dense legal jargon. That is the voluntary waiver of temporary guardianship and medical authority, I explained with deliberate precision. The morning you both refused to take responsibility for Leo, claiming Brittany was simply at a wellness retreat, I had my corporate legal team draft this. You signed it without reading a single paragraph because you were terrified of being inconvenienced. That signature legally established me as Leo's primary caretaker. Harrison went entirely pale. You tricked us, he hissed, his voice dropping into a dangerous tone. You manipulated us into signing away our rights. I did not manipulate anything, I shot back, instantly leaning over the island. I gave you a choice to protect your helpless grandson, and you chose your golf game instead. But that document was only the very first step. It gave my lawyers the necessary legal standing to approach the state family court on Jamal's behalf. I reached into the folder again and pulled out a much thicker document. It was securely bound with a blue legal cover and stamped with the official raised seal of the Massachusetts Family Court. I dropped it heavily onto the granite island. The loud thud echoed in the quiet room. What is that? Brittany whispered, her voice cracking with genuine, unadulterated fear. That is the final nail in your coffin, I told her coldly. When a mother abandons a 1-month-old infant outside in freezing temperatures, the state of Massachusetts considers it severe felony child endangerment. When my legal team presented the porch security footage to the judge, along with the concrete evidence of your premeditated financial crimes and your immediate flight from the country, the court moved with unprecedented speed. Brittany reached out with trembling fingers and pulled the heavy document toward her. She flipped open the cover, scanning the bold text on the first page. They did not just grant Jamal full legal and physical custody, I continued, my voice echoing with absolute finality. The judge determined you are a clear and present danger to the child. The court has officially and permanently severed your parental rights, Brittany. You are no longer his mother in the eyes of the law. You have zero claim to custody, zero claim to visitation, and absolutely zero claim to Jamal's financial settlement. A choked, guttural sob ripped from Brittany's throat. She dropped the document as if it were literally on fire. She collapsed onto the hardwood floor of my kitchen, burying her face in her hands, weeping hysterically. For the very first time in her privileged life, there was no bailout, no convenient excuse, and absolutely no escape. Get off my floor and get out of my house, I told Brittany, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. You have exactly 10 seconds to leave before Jamal calls the police to report a direct violation of a federal court order. Harrison roughly grabbed Brittany's arm, hauling her up from the hardwood floor. His face was a rigid mask of pure, humiliated fury. He pointed a trembling finger at me. This is not over, Cassidy. He sneered, his chest heaving with rage. You think you can use a corrupt family court judge to steal my grandson and humiliate this family. I will absolutely destroy your life for this. You have absolutely no idea what I am capable of. I do not care what you are capable of, I replied coldly, opening the front door wide. Leave my property right now. Patricia practically dragged the loudly sobbing Brittany out the door, with Harrison storming close behind them. I slammed the heavy oak door shut and locked the deadbolt, the loud click echoing with finality through the quiet foyer. Jamal let out a massive, shuddering breath, leaning heavily back against the wall. He looked at me, a complex mixture of exhaustion and profound relief washing over his face. We actually did it, he whispered. We won the legal battle. I corrected him gently, walking over to check the security camera feed. But we have not won the war. My father operates entirely on ego and public perception. We just stripped him of both in private. He is going to retaliate, and he is going to do it in the only arena he truly understands. He will try to use his social influence to force our hand. I was entirely right. My father simply could not accept defeat, especially from the daughter he had spent 35 years actively belittling. Exactly 1 week later, a heavy cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox via certified courier. It was sealed with my parents' custom gold wax crest. I opened it while Jamal was feeding Leo in the kitchen. Inside was an incredibly ornate, formally printed invitation. It announced a grand family reunion and spring celebration dinner to be held at my parents' sprawling Belmont estate that upcoming Saturday evening. The guest list included our entire extended family, dozens of my aunts and uncles, and a carefully curated selection of the most influential socialites from their exclusive country club circle. I walked into the kitchen and handed the thick card to Jamal. He read it, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "A dinner party," he asked, looking up at me. "After everything that just happened, he is throwing a lavish dinner party." "It is not a party," Jamala explained, pouring myself a glass of sparkling water. "It is a highly orchestrated ambush. He knows he has absolutely no legal ground left to stand on. His lawyers probably looked at the family court ruling and told him it was entirely airtight. So he is reverting to his absolute favorite weapon: total public humiliation." Jamal shook his head. "I do not understand. How does a dinner party get him what he wants? He is going to fill that massive house with every single person we are related to, along with all of his wealthy, deeply judgmental friends," I said, leaning casually against the granite counter. "He is going to play the role of the heartbroken, magnanimous patriarch. He will stand up in front of 100 people and publicly demand that I hand over the baby to Brittany. He is banking on the fact that the immense social pressure, the vicious whispers, and the collective judgment of the entire Belmont elite will eventually break me. He thinks I am still that terrified, insecure little girl who would do absolutely anything to avoid a public scene. He wants to back us into a tight corner where refusing him makes us look like the ultimate villains." Jamal tossed the expensive invitation onto the kitchen island in disgust. "Well, he is completely out of his mind. We are obviously not going. I will stay right here with Leo, and we can spend the evening ignoring their phone calls." I took a slow sip of my water, a cold, calculating smile spreading across my face. "Actually, Jamal, we are absolutely going. We are going to dress in our very best clothes. We are going to walk right through their front doors. And we are going to let him gather his massive audience." Jamal stared at me, completely stunned by my response. "Cassidy, why would we willingly walk straight into a firing squad?" Because I replied softly, my eyes locking onto his. "My father went through a lot of trouble to gather every single person who has ever looked down on us into one single room. It would be incredibly rude not to give them the exact show they came to see. I have spent my entire life biting my tongue to protect their fragile fake reputation. I am done protecting them. I am going to use his own stage to burn his entire kingdom to the ground." Jamal looked at my determined expression for a long moment before a slow, knowing grin finally broke across his face. "Tell me exactly what to wear," he said. Saturday evening arrived with a crisp, clear spring breeze that swept through the perfectly manicured grounds of the Belmont Country Club. My father had apparently changed the venue at the last minute, realizing our family estate was currently owned by an anonymous corporate entity that might notice an unauthorized massive gathering. He opted instead for the most expensive exclusive dining hall the country club had to offer, a place where he could heavily control the guest list and the optics. Jamal smoothly pulled his brand new custom-ordered luxury sedan up to the grand entrance. The valet rushed forward to open our doors immediately, recognizing the quiet, undeniable wealth radiating from the vehicle. We stepped out into the warm evening light. We had left Leo safely back at my heavily fortified house, under the strict supervision of a highly credentialed pediatric nurse and 2 armed private security contractors from my firm. There was absolutely no way I was bringing my 5-month-old nephew into a hostile, psychologically toxic environment. Tonight was not about family bonding. Tonight was a highly calculated corporate execution. I did not dress like the invisible compliant older sister. I dressed like the chief executive officer of Vanguard Crisis Public Relations. I wore a razor-sharp, tailored emerald green pantsuit with aggressively structured shoulders and a pair of sleek black designer stilettos. I wore no jewelry except for a heavy gold watch. Jamal looked equally devastating. He wore a bespoke navy blue suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, paired with a crisp white shirt and no tie. He did not look like the despised outcast ex-husband. He looked exactly like a man who had just secured a $4 million settlement and held absolute power over his own destiny. We walked through the heavy mahogany front doors and stepped into the grand ballroom. The space was completely breathtaking, decorated with towering floral centerpieces, sparkling crystal chandeliers, and walls lined with expensive champagne flutes. My father had spared absolutely no expense, likely putting the entire lavish event on a high-interest credit card he could no longer afford. The room was packed with at least 100 people. Every single aunt, uncle, cousin, and wealthy socialite from my parents' inner circle was present. As we stood at the top of the carpeted staircase overlooking the ballroom, I immediately spotted the center of the spectacle. Brittany was holding court in the middle of the room, surrounded by a tight circle of fawning relatives. She had meticulously styled herself for the role of the ultimate victim. She was wearing a pale blush-colored silk dress that intentionally made her look fragile, innocent, and tragically maternal. She had completely dialed back her usually heavy, glamorous makeup, opting instead for a pale, exhausted look that perfectly sold her narrative of a heartbroken, suffering mother. As we watched, she dabbed at her dry eyes with a white lace handkerchief, while my Aunt Beatrice rubbed her back in soothing, rhythmic circles. My mother, Patricia, was standing right beside her, dramatically accepting condolences from the local country club wives as if she were hosting a wake. She was playing the brave, supportive grandmother, fiercely protecting her deeply traumatized youngest daughter from the cruel injustices of the world. I placed my hand lightly on Jamal's arm. "Are you ready for this?" I asked quietly. Jamal adjusted his suit jacket, his eyes locked dead onto Brittany. "I have been ready for 4 months," he replied, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Let us go say hello to the family." We began our descent down the grand staircase. The heavy click of my stilettos echoed sharply against the marble steps. It took exactly 10 seconds for the first person to notice us. A wealthy socialite standing near the bottom of the stairs gasped softly, tapping the shoulder of the woman next to her. Like a rapid domino effect, heads began to turn. The polite, quiet chatter of the room began to die down, replaced by a sudden, incredibly tense wave of furious whispering. The string quartet playing softly in the corner seemed to fade entirely into the background as the crowd naturally parted, creating a wide, highly uncomfortable path directly through the center of the ballroom. They stared at us with a mixture of absolute disgust and undeniable shock. They expected to see a bitter, lonely spinster and a defeated, broke outsider cowering under the weight of their collective social judgment. Instead, they saw 2 people radiating absolute, unshakable power. We walked straight through the parted sea of judgmental relatives. We did not lower our eyes. We did not rush our pace. We owned every single inch of that room. As we approached the center of the ballroom, Brittany finally looked up from her lace handkerchief. The fake, tragic expression on her face instantly shattered, replaced by a flash of genuine, unadulterated panic as she realized we were not here to surrender. She gripped my Aunt Beatrice's arm tightly, her knuckles turning completely white under the bright chandelier light. The trap was finally set, but she was entirely unaware that she was the one standing directly on the trigger. The heavy silence in the ballroom was finally broken by the sharp, ringing sound of silver striking crystal. My father, Harrison, had stepped up to the small raised dais at the front of the room, right next to the string quartet. He was holding a tall champagne flute in one hand and a silver dessert spoon in the other. He tapped the delicate glass 3 times, projecting an aura of absolute benevolent authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, family and cherished friends," Harrison announced, his booming voice easily carrying across the massive brightly lit dining hall. "May I please have your undivided attention for just a few moments?" The frantic whispering immediately ceased. All eyes shifted away from Jamal and me, turning eagerly toward the patriarch of the family. Harrison offered the crowd a warm, incredibly practiced smile. It was the exact same calculated smile he used to close lucrative business deals and charm wealthy country club investors. "Thank you all so much for gathering here tonight to celebrate the arrival of spring and the enduring, unbreakable strength of our family." Harrison began placing his glass down carefully on a nearby cocktail table. "As many of you know, the past 4 months have been incredibly challenging for us. Our youngest daughter, Brittany, suffered from a severe, terrifying bout of postpartum depression. It is a dark, painful condition that affects so many vulnerable new mothers, and it forced her to seek intensive medical treatment at a highly specialized wellness retreat far out of the country." A collective murmur of sympathetic agreement rippled through the crowd of elite socialites. Several older aunts nodded solemnly, dabbing at their eyes with expensive napkins. Harrison paused deliberately, letting the emotional weight of his fabricated story sink deep into the room before continuing. "It was a devastating time," Harrison said, lowering his voice to a compassionate, sorrowful register. "But during her necessary absence, our family stepped up just as strong families are always supposed to do. My eldest daughter, Cassidy, took the young boy into her home. We were all so incredibly grateful for her assistance during such a sudden, tragic emergency." Harrison turned his piercing gaze directly toward me. His warm smile vanished, replaced by a look of profound, incredibly condescending pity. However, prolonged isolation and deep-seated personal insecurities can often cloud a person's judgment. Cassidy, who has struggled for so many long years to find a traditional family of her own, became dangerously and unnaturally attached to the child. She partnered with Brittany's estranged ex-husband Jamal, a man who has unfortunately allowed his bitter resentment over their failed marriage to completely override his basic human decency. Jamal stood perfectly still beside me, his broad shoulders squared, and his face an impenetrable mask of stone. He did not react to the vicious public insult, knowing exactly what we were about to do next. Together, Harrison continued, his voice rising in volume and theatrical indignation. "Cassidy and Jamal have exploited obscure legal loopholes to keep a loving, recovering mother entirely separated from her helpless newborn son. They have actively used my daughter's temporary medical vulnerability against her in the absolute most cruel, vindictive way imaginable. But tonight, we are putting a definitive end to this painful chapter. Tonight is about healing, profound forgiveness, and restoring the natural, proper order of this family." Harrison gestured grandly toward Brittany, who was now weeping softly into her mother's shoulder, playing her tragic victim role flawlessly. Cassidy, Harrison commanded, his tone shifting from a sympathetic patriarch to a stern, unyielding dictator. "I am standing before our entire family and our most trusted friends to demand that you do the right thing. Drop this absurd legal charade immediately. Release the frivolous restraining orders. Give Leo back to his rightful loving mother, where he truly belongs. If you do this tonight, right here and now, we will generously forgive your deeply misguided actions. We will welcome you back into the fold. But you must surrender the child." The ballroom erupted into a low buzz of approval. The aunts and uncles were nodding vigorously. The country club elites were looking at me with undisguised contempt, fully buying into my father's masterful manipulation. They waited eagerly for the subservient older sister to hang her head in shame, apologize for her alleged jealousy, and comply with her father's decree. Brittany peeked from behind Patricia's shoulder, her fake tears stopped. A smug smirk tugged at her lips. She thought peer pressure and social humiliation had finally cornered me. I looked at my father on the dais, then at the sea of judgmental faces expecting a total surrender. I turned my head slightly and made direct eye contact with the audio-visual technician standing near the back wall. I gave him a single deliberate nod. The moment I secretly gave the signal, the crystal chandeliers illuminating the ballroom instantly went dark. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the room plunged into shadow. The string quartet halted their music with a harsh scrape of bows. Before anyone could panic, a massive projector screen hummed to life, descending from the ceiling directly behind the raised dais where my father was standing. Harrison blinked blindly into the sudden darkness, his carefully crafted benevolent patriarch persona slipping into immediate genuine annoyance. "What is the meaning of this?" he barked aggressively into the microphone, waving his free hand angrily toward the back of the massive room. "Turn the lights back on this instant. We are in the middle of a very important family announcement." I did not wait for the lights to return. I let go of Jamal's arm and walked purposefully toward the front. The sharp clicking of my designer stilettos echoed loudly in the tense silence. I climbed the short steps to the dais, approaching my father with absolute unshakable confidence. He glared at me, his eyes widening in confusion as I stepped directly into his personal space. I did not ask for his permission. I simply reached out and took the microphone right out of his hand. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice projecting through the sound system. My father has just painted a moving portrait of our family dynamics. He told a heartbreaking story about a devoted mother and a jealous older sister, wanting to steal a life she could never build. It was a beautiful speech, Dad. But there is a significant problem with your fabricated narrative. It relies entirely on the assumption that I am a powerless, financially dependent assistant who needs your social approval to survive. I pressed a small wireless remote hidden in the palm of my right hand. The massive screen behind me flashed brilliantly to life, bathing the entire ballroom in a stark, icy blue light. Displayed in massive, bold letters was the sleek, authoritative corporate brand logo of Vanguard Crisis Public Relations. Underneath the iconic logo, my professional headshot appeared next to my official corporate leadership title. For the past 10 long years, I continued pacing slowly across the stage so everyone could see my face clearly. My parents told you that I work from my living room answering emails for a local marketing agency. They told you I was a failure because it made it much easier to elevate Brittany as the flawless golden child. But that was a convenient, pathetic lie. My name is Cassidy, and I am the sole founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Crisis Public Relations. The reaction was instantaneous and satisfying. The Belmont Country Club was not filled with ordinary people. It was packed with wealthy business owners, corporate executives, and high-powered politicians. They all recognized the Vanguard name immediately. Vanguard was the notoriously ruthless firm that handled massive corporate espionage cases, embezzlement scandals, and the messy divorces of the ultra-rich. A loud collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. I watched as the chief executive officer of a major tech firm dropped his jaw, whispering my name to his wife in absolute disbelief. He personally paid my firm a massive retainer last year to save his company from a catastrophic data breach. Harrison stared at the massive screen, his face turning an unhealthy, ashen shade of gray. The brutal reality of my wealth and immense corporate power was hitting him like a physical blow to the chest. He reached out frantically, trying to grab the microphone back from me. "Cassidy, stop this ridiculous, disrespectful nonsense right now," he hissed aggressively through his gritted teeth. "You are completely embarrassing this entire family in public." Before his hand could even touch the microphone, Jamal stepped smoothly right up onto the dais. He did not say a single word. He just stood firmly between my father and me, a silent, immovable wall of absolute protection. Harrison froze instantly, remembering the brutal reality of the active restraining order and Jamal's overwhelming financial leverage over Brittany's completely ruined life. I turned my attention back to the shocked crowd of socialites. As a crisis management specialist, my entire career is built on uncovering the absolute truth when desperate people try to bury it under expensive public relations spin. And I must say, Dad, your public relations spin tonight was incredibly sloppy. You brought everyone here to publicly shame Jamal and me into handing over a helpless infant to a woman you claim is a recovering, deeply loving mother. But since you boldly brought up the sensitive subject of Brittany's exclusive wellness retreat, I think it is only fair that we show your guests exactly what kind of wellness she was actively practicing. I clicked the small remote in my hand a second time. The massive screen behind me shifted instantly from my corporate logo to a high-resolution scan of official bank records. The stark black and white numbers were blown up so large that even the elderly guests sitting in the very back row could read them perfectly. I used the laser pointer attached to my remote, circling a specific transaction time-stamped exactly 4 months ago, right in the middle of a massive winter storm. This is a joint savings account belonging to Jamal and my sister, I announced. On the exact same day Brittany supposedly suffered her mental breakdown, she authorized an immediate wire transfer. She moved $250,000 into an untraceable offshore shell account. She liquidated her husband's life savings in minutes. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the dining hall. I did not give them a single second to process the theft before delivering the next blow. I clicked the remote again. A copy of a police report appeared on the screen, heavily redacted, but clearly showing Brittany's signature at the bottom. To bypass the bank's dual authorization security protocols for such a massive withdrawal, I explained, pacing slowly across the dais. Brittany marched into a local police precinct and filed a completely fraudulent domestic violence report against Jamal. She swore under oath that he was a violent, abusive monster who was threatening her life. She used that horrific lie to trigger an emergency financial exemption, successfully locking an innocent man out of his own bank accounts while he was sitting at his office desk. Jamal remained stoic beside me, but profound vindication shone in his eyes. The wealthy country club wives who had just been sending Brittany sympathetic glances were now staring at her in absolute horror. Filing a false police report to commit financial fraud was a massive felony, and in their elite social circles, it was the ultimate unforgivable scandal. But I was not even close to being finished. I clicked the remote a third time. The dreary black and white financial documents vanished, replaced by a vibrant, full-color spread of credit card statements and high-definition photographs. My father told you Brittany was recovering at an exclusive, secluded wellness retreat, I said, allowing a sharp, mocking edge to finally enter my voice. According to her frozen credit card statements, that specialized medical facility was actually the Grand Velas luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. I pointed the laser at the itemized receipts. Her intensive medical treatment included $5,000 a night oceanfront suites, daily couples massages, and exorbitant amounts of vintage champagne charged to room service. The photographs on the right side were the final nail in the coffin. My investigative team tracked down her burner accounts and purchased security footage from the resort. The images clearly showed Brittany lounging on a pristine beach. She was wearing a tiny designer bikini, holding a massive margarita, and laughing hysterically. She looked healthy, deeply tanned, and completely unbothered. More importantly, she was not alone. In every single photograph, she was intimately wrapped in the arms of a tall, muscular man with a deep tan and expensive sunglasses. It was a man who was very obviously not her husband. This is the heartbreaking reality of her severe postpartum depression, I declared loudly over the chaotic whispers of the stunned crowd. She did not flee because she was overwhelmed by early motherhood. She fled to take a luxury vacation with her secret lover, using stolen money completely free from the heavy burdens of her marriage and newborn child. The ballroom erupted. Aunt Beatrice, who had been rubbing Brittany's back just minutes ago, physically recoiled from her as if my sister were suddenly highly contagious. A heavy crystal wine glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered loudly against the marble floor, but nobody even looked away from the damning evidence on the massive screen. Brittany stood frozen in the center of the room. Her pale, tragic facade was entirely destroyed. Her face flushed a deep, ugly crimson as the undeniable documented proof of her infidelity and federal crimes was broadcasted to every single person she had ever tried to impress. Patricia tried to shield Brittany's face with her hands, but the damage was already permanently done. Harrison gripped the edge of the dais, his knuckles stark white. "You hacked her accounts," he stammered weakly, his voice barely audible over the loud, furious gossip filling the room. "This is illegal." "No, Dad," I corrected him coldly, looking down at his defeated posture. "It is called legal discovery." And while she was drinking champagne in Mexico with her boyfriend, do you want to know exactly where she left her 1-month-old son? I clicked the remote for the 4th time. The bright sun-drenched photographs of Cabo San Lucas vanished instantly. The massive screen plunged into the stark black and white of an infrared security camera feed. In the top right corner, the timestamp flashed brightly in bold red font. It read 2:14 in the morning, exactly 4 months ago. The high-definition microphone attached to my porch camera captured the audio perfectly. The ballroom filled with the incredibly loud howling sound of a brutal Boston winter storm. The sleet sounded like tiny stones striking the pavement. "Watch very closely," I instructed the completely silent room. This is the exact moment my sister began her courageous journey to find herself. On the massive screen, Brittany's leased silver sport utility vehicle sped recklessly into my icy driveway. The brakes locked slightly as she slammed them in the slick conditions. The heavy driver's side door opened, and Brittany stepped out into the freezing rain. The unedited 4K resolution left absolutely no room for interpretation. Everyone in the dining hall could clearly see her face twisted in a scowl of pure annoyance, not the tragic sorrow of a depressed mother. She was wearing a thick winter coat protected from the cold. She walked to the back door of the vehicle and yanked it open. She reached inside and grabbed the infant car seat with one hand. A collective gasp, much louder and far more horrified than the last, echoed through the ballroom as the family watched her march briskly toward my front porch. She did not hold the carrier gently against her chest. She swung it carelessly at her side like cumbersome luggage she could not wait to discard. When she reached the concrete porch, she did not bend down to carefully place the baby in a safe spot. She practically dropped the carrier onto the freezing ground. It hit the icy concrete with a hard, sickening thud that echoed through the high-end audio system of the dining hall. Several women in the crowd actually screamed out loud. My Uncle George, a man who had never spoken a harsh word, let out a loud curse. On the screen, Brittany carelessly shoved a folded note under the plastic handle. She did not pull the thin fleece blanket up to protect her son's face from the sideways sleet. She did not hesitate, and she did not cry. She simply turned on her heel, marched rapidly back to her warm vehicle, slammed the door shut, and sped backward down the driveway. The red glow of her taillights disappeared into the dark night. I let the video continue playing for another agonizing 60 seconds. The only sound in the grand ballroom was the howling wind from the speakers and the faint, incredibly desperate cries of a freezing 1-month-old infant echoing from the abandoned car seat on the screen. It was pure, unfiltered cruelty broadcasted in high definition. "Turn it off!" Aunt Beatrice sobbed loudly, burying her face in her hands. "Please, Cassidy, turn it off. It is completely unbearable." I clicked the remote, freezing the frame on the abandoned car seat. I turned to face the crowd. My sister left her newborn son to freeze to death so she could catch a morning flight to Mexico with her boyfriend. That is the undeniable truth. But what makes this situation truly unforgivable is not just what Brittany did. It is what my parents did the very next morning. The furious, disgusted eyes of every single person in the room slowly shifted away from the frozen image on the screen and locked directly onto Harrison and Patricia. I called my parents immediately. I told the crowd, my voice ringing with clarity. They arrived at my house, looked at their abandoned, freezing grandson, and explicitly refused to help. They told me to raise him myself, because taking care of a baby would ruin their perfect Sunday schedule. They willingly signed a legal waiver surrendering guardianship rights so they could play golf. They fabricated the entire wellness retreat narrative, actively lied to you, and launched a vicious public smear campaign against me just to protect their social standing. Harrison stood frozen on the dais. His face was slicked with cold sweat. Patricia tried to reach out to one of her closest country club friends standing in the front row, but the woman physically recoiled, taking 3 massive steps backward, as if my mother were entirely diseased. The elite social circle my parents had spent their entire lives worshipping and sacrificing their own children for had just turned against them completely. "You are a monster, Patricia," the woman hissed venomously, her voice carrying across the silent room. "Both of you are absolute monsters." The harsh, venomous words from the country club socialite hung heavily in the air, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. Patricia stood completely frozen, her eyes darting wildly around the grand ballroom. She looked at the faces of the women she had spent decades desperately trying to impress, the women she had hosted at lavish brunches and played tennis with every single Tuesday. They were all staring back at her with unshielded disgust. The flawless public image she valued more than her own children was shattering into a million irreparable pieces right in front of her eyes. Unable to process the overwhelming social rejection, Patricia's mind violently rejected reality. She spun around and focused all of her blinding rage entirely on me. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Shut up!" Patricia shrieked at the crowd, her voice cracking wildly. Then she pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my face. "This is all your fault. You orchestrated this entire circus just to humiliate us, you jealous, vindictive witch. You have always wanted to destroy this family. You are completely dead to us. Get out of my sight right now, and do not you ever dare to step foot inside my house again." I stood perfectly still on the raised dais. I did not flinch at her screaming, and I did not back away. Instead, a slow, genuinely cold smile spread across my face. I reached into the sleek leather briefcase I had placed on the dais earlier and calmly unclasped the silver lock. "There is a very significant flaw in your dramatic threat, Mother," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the microphone so every single person in the silent ballroom could hear my response. "You cannot permanently ban me from a house that you do not actually own." Harrison stepped forward, his face flushed with a mixture of confusion and boiling anger. "What absolute nonsense are you talking about now? Cassidy," he barked, trying desperately to regain some shred of authority in front of his wealthy peers. "We own the Belmont estate. We have lived in that house for 25 years. It is our property." I pulled a thick, legally bound folder from my briefcase. "No, Dad. You own the Belmont estate for 22 years. I corrected him, keeping my tone deadly calm and analytical. 3 years ago, you were secretly drowning in massive, insurmountable debt. You drained your retirement accounts and took out high-interest loans just to quietly pay off Brittany's previous legal settlements and secret credit card debts. You hid it from everyone in this room, but you could not hide it from the bank. The bank initiated a formal foreclosure process to seize the mansion." Harrison went entirely pale. The color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. The crowd began whispering frantically again, completely shocked to learn the wealthy patriarch was secretly broke. "You thought you were saved at the very last minute by a miraculous private investment firm called Apex Financial Holdings." I continued, pacing slowly across the stage. "They bought your foreclosed debt and offered you a restructured payment plan that allowed you to quietly stay in the mansion and keep up your pathetic facade of wealth. You enthusiastically signed the massive stack of paperwork without ever looking into who actually owned Apex Financial Holdings." I walked to the edge of the dais and looked directly down into my father's terrified eyes. "Apex Financial Holdings is a private shell corporation entirely owned and operated by Vanguard Crisis Public Relations," I declared, letting the brutal reality wash over him. "I bought your foreclosed debt, Dad. I own the deed to the Belmont estate. The monthly payments you have been making for the past 3 years are not a mortgage, they are rent payments. I am your landlord." Patricia let out a loud, hysterical gasp. "That is a lie," she screamed, shaking her head aggressively. That is a complete and utter lie. I pulled the official state-certified property deed from the folder and tossed it effortlessly onto the cocktail table nearest to them. The heavy parchment landed with a soft slap. You can read the notarized signatures for yourself, I offered coldly. But I was not quite finished. I reached into the folder one final time and pulled out a single crisp sheet of white paper. Since you clearly violated the moral and behavioral clauses of our lease agreement by orchestrating a vicious public smear campaign against your landlord, I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. And since you just publicly ordered me off my own property, I think it is time we officially terminate our arrangement. I let the paper flutter down from the dais, landing perfectly right next to the property deed. That is an official, legally binding 30-day eviction notice, I announced to my parents. You have exactly 1 month to pack up your designer clothes, clear out of my house, and find somewhere else to live. The crisp, white eviction notice rested perfectly still on the cocktail table beside the heavy property deed. Patricia stared down at the terrifying piece of paper, her mouth opening and closing silently, as if she had completely forgotten how to speak. The grand ballroom of the Belmont Country Club was so incredibly quiet that the clinking of ice melting in unattended glasses echoed loudly across the room. But that heavy, suffocating silence was suddenly broken by a piercing sound rapidly approaching from the street outside. It started as a faint, high-pitched wail in the distance, but within seconds, it multiplied and grew deafeningly loud. The unmistakable sound of multiple police sirens cut violently through the peaceful spring night. Slices of stark red and blue light began flashing rapidly through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the dining hall, painting the shocked faces of the country club elite in harsh, alternating colors. A wave of fresh panic washed over the crowd. Guests began stepping away from my family, entirely clearing a wide path toward the grand entrance. The heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom were suddenly pushed wide open. 2 uniformed Boston police officers stepped inside, immediately followed by 2 stern-looking men wearing dark windbreakers with the letters FBI printed boldly across their backs. Harrison stood frozen on the raised dais, his face pale and slick with cold sweat. Patricia instinctively grabbed Brittany's arm, trying to pull her youngest daughter behind her, as if she could hide a grown woman from federal authorities in the middle of a brightly lit room. Brittany Harrison, the lead federal agent, called out, his authoritative voice easily cutting through the panicked murmurs of the wealthy guests. He did not ask a question. He stated her name with absolute certainty as he marched directly down the center aisle, his eyes locked entirely on my trembling sister. Brittany pressed herself against Patricia's back, shaking uncontrollably. "Daddy, do something," she whimpered, her voice a pathetic high-pitched squeak. "Tell them to leave. Tell them this is a private event." But Harrison did not move. He did not shout orders or threaten to call the police commissioner like he normally would have. He was a completely broken man, stripped of his fake wealth and his unearned authority. He just stared blankly at the approaching federal agents. "Brittany Harrison, you are under arrest for severe federal wire fraud, grand larceny, and felony identity theft," the agent announced coldly as he stepped up to the group. He reached out, grabbed Brittany's wrist firmly, and pulled her away from my mother. Brittany screamed, thrashing wildly in her expensive silk dress, but the agent smoothly spun her around and snapped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs onto her wrists. The loud metallic click echoed through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. "You have the right to remain silent," the second agent recited, reading her Miranda rights, as Brittany sobbed hysterically, her carefully applied makeup running in dark streaks down her face. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Patricia lunged forward, her manicured claws extended. "Get your hands off my daughter," she shrieked. "You cannot arrest her. We are members of this club." One of the uniformed police officers instantly stepped into Patricia's path, resting his hand casually on his utility belt. "Ma'am, I highly suggest you step back immediately," the officer warned, in a low, dangerous tone. unless you want to be arrested for interfering with a federal investigation." Patricia gasped, shrinking back as if she had been physically struck. Realizing that his money was gone, his reputation was permanently destroyed, and his golden child was currently being hauled away in steel handcuffs, Harrison resorted to his absolute final desperate tactic. He clutched his chest with both hands, letting out a loud, dramatic groan. He stumbled backward, knocking over a cocktail table and sending crystal glasses shattering across the marble floor. "My heart!" Harrison gasped loudly, dropping heavily onto one knee and looking pleadingly toward the crowd of his wealthy, influential friends. "Please, someone help me. I am having a severe chest pain. Call an ambulance immediately." He breathed heavily, squeezing his eyes shut, waiting for the frantic rush of footsteps and the concerned cries of his peers. He waited for the country club manager to bring the emergency medical kit. He waited for anyone to validate his manufactured suffering. It was a pathetic, highly calculated performance designed to instantly shift the narrative and paint himself as the ultimate tragic victim. Instead, absolutely nothing happened. The wealthy business owners, the politicians, and the country club wives simply stood there and watched him with cold, detached disgust. Not a single person stepped forward to help him. Aunt Beatrice actually turned her back entirely, refusing to even look at the pathetic display. The elite society he had worshipped his entire life recognized a sinking ship, and they were actively letting him drown. A passing waiter casually set a glass of tap water on a nearby table, but that was the absolute extent of the compassion the room had left to offer. Jamal and I stood quietly on the dais watching the spectacular collapse of his empire. We did not need to say a single word. The total silence of the room was the loudest verdict possible. The illusion of the untouchable Harrison family was officially dead and buried. Harrison remained on his hands and knees for a few more agonizing seconds. When he finally realized that absolutely no one was going to rush to his aid, his fake heavy breathing slowly stopped. He awkwardly pushed himself up from the marble floor, his face burning with a profound, inescapable shame. He dusted off his expensive tailored trousers, refusing to make eye contact with any of the wealthy investors who were now actively turning their backs on him, and walking briskly toward the grand exit. The massive ballroom was rapidly emptying out. The elite socialites wanted absolutely nothing to do with a federal crime scene, and they certainly wanted nothing to do with a bankrupt family. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind the federal agents, completely cutting off Brittany's frantic, hysterical screams. The stark red and blue lights stopped flashing through the tall windows as the police cruisers pulled away from the country club entrance, taking the precious golden child straight to a federal holding cell. Patricia was left standing completely alone next to the overturned cocktail table. She looked down at the crisp white eviction notice resting perfectly next to the legal property deed. The absolute reality of her situation finally crashed down on her with the crushing, suffocating weight of a collapsing building. In less than 20 minutes, she had lost her favorite daughter to the federal penitentiary. She had lost her pristine social standing forever. And she was about to lose the multi-million-dollar mansion that served as the entire foundation of her fake identity. Her manicured hands began to tremble violently. She slowly lifted her head and looked up at me standing on the raised dais. The vicious, hateful woman who had just screamed at me to get out of her sight was completely gone. In her place was a terrified, desperate woman who suddenly realized she had absolutely no power left. Patricia took a slow, unsteady step toward the dais. Then another. When she reached the bottom of the short wooden staircase, her legs simply gave out. She collapsed heavily onto her knees, the expensive blush silk of her designer dress pooling around her on the hard floor. She looked up at me, hot tears streaming rapidly down her face, entirely destroying her perfect makeup. Cassidy. Patricia sobbed, her voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine that echoed loudly through the nearly empty dining hall. "Cassidy, please. You cannot do this to us. I am begging you. You are my dearest eldest daughter. I carried you. I raised you. You cannot throw your own mother and father out onto the street. We have absolutely nowhere else to go. We will lose everything we have ever worked for. Please have some mercy on your family." I stood looking down at the woman who had spent 35 years making me feel like an unwanted, invisible burden in my own home. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel the sudden overwhelming urge to comfort her. I felt nothing but absolute icy closure. I casually reached up and smoothly adjusted the lapels of my emerald green suit jacket, brushing away an invisible speck of dust from my shoulder. I looked at Jamal, who stood solid as a rock beside me. Then I lifted the microphone back to my mouth, making sure my final words to them would be perfectly amplified. "Your dearest eldest daughter," I repeated, letting the phrase roll off my tongue with heavy sarcasm. "That is a fascinating term, Mother. Because just 2 weeks ago, you publicly announced to this entire country club that I was a barren, jealous spinster. You told hundreds of people that I was a deeply unwell, manipulative psychopath who stole a baby because no man would ever love me." Patricia choked on a loud sob, shaking her head frantically. "I was just upset," she pleaded weakly. "I did not mean any of those horrible things, Cassidy. I was just trying to protect your sister." "And what about the morning you stood in my kitchen?" I asked, my voice growing colder and sharper with every single word. "The morning you drank my espresso while a 1-month-old baby was recovering from near hypothermia in my living room. You looked me right in the eye and told me to raise him to repay my massive debt to this family. You told me I owed you for not turning out perfectly like Brittany." I took a single step down the stairs, towering directly over her kneeling form. "You called Jamal a broke, arrogant thug. You called me a sick, vindictive witch. You spent my entire life treating me like a disposable asset, expecting me to quietly clean up every single mess your perfect golden child ever made. But the moment I stopped being your compliant little mule, the moment I actually held the power, you showed me exactly who you truly are." Harrison had finally walked over, standing weakly behind Patricia. He did not say a word to defend her. He just stared at the floor, a completely defeated, broken old man. "I am not throwing my family out onto the street," I told Patricia, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper that still echoed perfectly through the microphone. "Because you are not my family. Jamal and Leo are my family. You are simply a toxic tenant who has severely violated the terms of your lease agreement. And I do not negotiate with toxic tenants." I turned my back on them entirely and handed the microphone back to the audio-visual technician. "The 30-day countdown starts tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I said coldly over my shoulder. "Do not leave a mess when you move out, or I will keep your security deposit." I stepped down from the raised dais, leaving the microphone behind. I did not look back. I did not need to see my parents' broken expressions or hear Patricia's pathetic whimpering to know my lifetime of subjugation had officially ended. Jamal fell into step beside me, his presence a steady anchor in the echoing space. We walked together down the center aisle of the grand ballroom. The country club staff, clearing the shattered crystal, stopped and watched us leave. They parted like the Red Sea, offering us a wide path of absolute unspoken respect. We pushed through the heavy doors and stepped out into the crisp Boston night. The cool air hit my face, washing away the suffocating atmosphere of toxic manipulation that had trapped me for 35 years. I took a deep, deliberate breath, filling my lungs completely. For the very first time in my entire life, the air did not feel heavy with my family's impossible expectations. It felt entirely clean. It felt like absolute freedom. The valet rushed forward, practically jogging to retrieve Jamal's luxury sedan from the front drive. He opened the passenger door for me with a polite nod, treating us not like outcasts, but like the most important people who had walked through those doors all evening. Jamal slid into the driver's seat, closing the door and instantly shutting out the noise of the outside world. The quiet hum of the powerful engine roared to life. We did not peel out of the driveway in a rush. Jamal simply put the car in drive and smoothly rolled away from the grand entrance, leaving the shattered wreckage of the Harrison family legacy entirely in our rearview mirror. As we drove down the winding, tree-lined streets of the exclusive Belmont neighborhood, the adrenaline that had been keeping me entirely focused and razor-sharp all evening finally began to fade. It was not replaced by sadness or guilt. It was replaced by a profound, overwhelming sense of absolute peace. I leaned my head back against the soft leather headrest and closed my eyes for a brief moment. "You were absolutely incredible in there," Jamal said softly, his deep voice breaking the comfortable silence inside the car. "I have spent years sitting through those agonizing family dinners, watching Harrison and Patricia expertly tear people apart with their condescending smiles and vicious whispers. But watching you surgically dismantle their entire fake empire in under 20 minutes was an absolute masterclass. They never stood a chance against you." I opened my eyes and looked over at him. The dashboard lights cast a warm, steady glow across his face. He looked relaxed, the heavy burden of Brittany's betrayal and the terrifying custody battle officially lifted from his broad shoulders. "They built their entire lives on a foundation of lies and projected insecurities," I replied quietly, watching the massive darkened mansions roll past my window. I just turned on the lights and forced them to look at the ugly truth. They spent my entire life trying to make me feel small so they could feel incredibly large. But tonight was the very last time they will ever have the power to make me feel anything at all. The eviction notice was not just about the house, Jamal. It was an eviction from my life. That chapter is closed. Jamal nodded in profound agreement, keeping his eyes securely on the dark road ahead. "We are going home," he said simply. The word home had never sounded so beautiful to me. We pulled into my driveway 30 minutes later. The secure cameras instantly recognized Jamal's vehicle and automatically unlocked the heavy iron gates I had recently installed. The house was glowing warmly against the dark night sky, an absolute fortress of safety and genuine love. We walked through the front door and were immediately greeted by the quiet professional nod of the armed security contractor stationed in the foyer. We thanked him and quietly made our way down the hall to the nursery. The pediatric nurse we had hired for the evening smiled warmly at us, packing up her bag as we entered the dimly lit room. I walked over to the wooden crib and looked down. Leo was fast asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. He was clutching a small stuffed bear, oblivious to the massive war we had just fought, and won entirely for his sake. Jamal stood right next to me, gently resting his hand on my shoulder. We looked down at the beautiful, innocent boy who had miraculously brought two discarded outcasts together. We had walked away from the toxic family we were born into, but looking at Leo, I knew with absolute certainty that we had finally found the real one. 1 year later, the harsh reality of consequence had finally settled permanently over the people who used to call themselves my family. Exactly 30 days after the country club disaster, Harrison and Patricia were forced to pack whatever meager belongings they could fit into a rented moving truck. They left the Belmont mansion handing the keys to my corporate legal team. Because their credit was completely destroyed by massive debt and public bankruptcy, they could not secure a lease anywhere near their old neighborhood. They ended up on the far industrial outskirts of the city, moving into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a decaying brick complex that smelled permanently of damp mildew and stale cigarette smoke. The transition was absolutely brutal for them. Patricia, a woman who had once spent thousands of dollars a month on luxury skincare and designer clothing, now spent her days sitting on a cheap peeling vinyl sofa she bought from a local thrift store. She still stubbornly wore her old pearl earrings, clinging desperately to the ghostly remnants of a social status that no longer existed. She spent hours staring at the peeling yellow wallpaper, occasionally scrolling through the social media accounts of her former country club friends. She watched from a cracked smartphone screen as the elite women she worshipped continued hosting lavish charity galas without her. Not a single person from their old life ever called to check on them. When Patricia tried to reach out, her numbers were immediately blocked. The high society circle had excised them like a malignant tumor. Harrison fared even worse. Stripped of his massive house, his fake wealth, and his intimidating public persona, he aged 10 years in a matter of months. He took a low-paying administrative job at a local auto parts distributor just to keep the lights on and pay for their basic groceries. He spent his evenings sitting silently at a wobbly laminate kitchen table, staring out the window at the cracked asphalt parking lot. He no longer barked orders. He no longer puffed out his chest to physically intimidate anyone. The arrogant patriarch who had once commanded rooms with a silver spoon and a crystal champagne flute was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, defeated old man who finally understood that his entire life had been a pathetic illusion. The absolute worst punishment for a narcissist is not anger or revenge. It is total, suffocating irrelevance. And they were now completely invisible to the world. While my parents served their agonizing sentence in social exile, my sister was serving her actual sentence in a federal penitentiary. Brittany had attempted to strike a plea deal, turning on her secret lover and offering to testify against him. But the federal prosecutors did not need her testimony. The digital and financial evidence my Vanguard team had meticulously compiled was so incredibly overwhelming that the judge handed down a strict 3-year sentence in a minimum security federal prison, completely denying any possibility of early parole. There were no luxury wellness retreats behind the high razor wire fences. There were no oceanfront suites or vintage champagne. Brittany traded her expensive blush silk dresses for a standard-issue scratchy khaki uniform. In the beginning, she tried to use her classic manipulation tactics. She tried crying on command, playing the fragile, misunderstood victim to gain sympathy from the prison guards and the other inmates. But fake tears hold no currency in a federal facility. For the first time in her 30 years of life, her striking blonde hair and her manufactured sorrow could not buy her a single ounce of special treatment. She was forced to wake up at dawn, scrub the heavy cafeteria floors, and sit alone in a cold, barren concrete cell with the crushing weight of her choices. She was allowed one phone call a week. She usually called Patricia, and they would spend their 15 minutes crying together, two incredibly selfish women, mourning the death of their unearned privilege. They had lost everything, because they simply could not stop themselves from wanting more, and because they fundamentally underestimated the quiet, invisible daughter they thought they could control forever. They were entirely trapped in prisons of their own making, both literal and metaphorical. Meanwhile, miles away from their misery, the sun was shining brightly on the life I had built from the ashes of their destruction. The stark contrast between their dark, isolated reality and the vibrant, loving home Jamal and I had created was profound. We did not spend our days looking backward at the ruins. We were far too busy looking forward toward our bright future. We had a beautiful son to raise, demanding careers to manage, and a massive fortune to enjoy together without any toxic shadows looming heavily over us. 2 full years have passed since the night the Harrison family empire officially collapsed. I am currently sitting in my expansive corner office at Vanguard Crisis Public Relations. The floor-to-ceiling windows offer a breathtaking view of the Boston skyline, bathed in the golden light of a Tuesday afternoon. My desk is covered in corporate contracts, but my favorite part of this room is the small, brightly colored playmat tucked neatly into the corner. It is a constant reminder of exactly why I fought so hard to build this life. The heavy glass door to my office suddenly swings open. I look up from my laptop and instantly break into a massive smile. Standing in the doorway is Jamal, holding the hand of a vibrant, fiercely energetic 3-year-old boy. Leo is no longer the fragile infant I found abandoned on my icy porch. He is a healthy, laughing toddler with his father's bright eyes and a completely fearless spirit. He drops Jamal's hand and immediately runs across the plush carpet, his little sneakers thudding happily against the floor. Auntie Cassidy Leo cheers loudly, launching himself directly into my arms. I catch him effortlessly, lifting him up and resting him on my hip. I press a kiss to his forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of his baby shampoo. He wraps his small arms tightly around my neck. Jamal walks in behind him, taking a seat on the leather sofa opposite my desk. Jamal looks incredibly rested and genuinely happy. He used his massive intellectual property settlement to launch his own boutique data analytics firm, and he is thriving both professionally and personally. "We are heading down to the park by the harbor," Jamal says, his voice filled with that deep, familiar warmth. "We wanted to see if you wanted to escape corporate America for an hour to feed the ducks with us." I look at the two of them, my heart swelling with profound gratitude. Jamal and I never forced a traditional romantic relationship to make things easier for the outside world to understand. We did not need a marriage certificate to prove our unwavering commitment to this child. We built an unbreakable partnership rooted in absolute mutual respect, a shared history of surviving betrayal, and a fierce love for the boy who brought us together. We are an unconventional family, but we are exactly the family we were always meant to be. I grab my coat and purse, ready to leave my billion-dollar firm behind for an afternoon in the park. But before I walk out the door, I turn to look directly at you. I want to take a moment to speak to anyone listening to this story who feels trapped in the exact same dark, suffocating shadow I lived in for 35 years. For my entire life, I believed that family was an inescapable life sentence. I believed that because we shared the same blood, I was permanently obligated to endure their emotional abuse, their relentless manipulation, and their cruel favoritism. Society constantly tells us that we must forgive and forget, no matter how deeply our relatives destroy our mental health. But I am standing here today to tell you that this is a complete lie. Blood does not give anyone a free pass to treat you like collateral damage. You do not owe your loyalty to people who only value you when they need someone to clean up their toxic messes. Sometimes the most powerful and terrifying thing you can do is simply walk away from the table where respect is no longer being served. Setting ironclad boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. When you finally stop pouring all of your precious energy into people who actively drain you, you create the necessary space for genuine, unconditional love to enter your life. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member to protect your own peace? Have you ever built a beautiful, unconventional family of your own after being abandoned by the people who were supposed to love you? I would absolutely love to hear your personal stories of triumph and resilience in the comments section below. Please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel if my journey resonated with you today. Share this video with anyone who might be struggling with a toxic family dynamic and needs a firm reminder that they hold the absolute power to rewrite their own story. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, the best revenge is simply living a massively successful, profoundly happy life without them. The incredible journey we just witnessed teaches a profound and necessary lesson about the true definition of family. For generations, society has pushed the narrative that blood is thicker than water, implying that we must endure endless manipulation, emotional abuse, and disrespect simply because we share DNA with our abusers. However, this story shatters that harmful illusion, proving that biological ties do not give anyone a free pass to treat you like collateral damage. The most empowering takeaway is that setting firm, unyielding boundaries with toxic relatives is not an act of cruelty or selfishness. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. For 35 years, the main character was treated as an invisible burden expected to absorb the failures of the golden child and cater to the narcissistic demands of her parents. But the moment she recognized her own worth and stopped seeking their conditional validation, she stripped them of all their power. Furthermore, we learn that family is not something you are strictly born into. It is something you can actively choose and create. By stepping up to protect a vulnerable infant and forging an alliance built on mutual respect with someone else who had been discarded, she built a beautiful, authentic home. True family members are the people who fiercely protect your peace, stand by your side during the darkest storms, and celebrate your power rather than trying to diminish it. Sometimes, walking away from the table where love is no longer being served is the absolute best way to finally find the peace you truly deserve. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic situation to protect your own peace, please share your story in the comments below and subscribe to join a community that celebrates healing and resilience.